For 3 months, my brother Jim was in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He'd been accused of murdering his college roommate, and even though the police didn't have any hard evidence against him, he was their only suspect. Jim swore to us that he'd seen a blonde man running from his dorms on the night of the murder, but he couldn't identify who it was. My family and I did everything we could to clear his name, but we didn't have a lot of information to use. Eventually, we were able to track down the security footage from an office across the street that showed a blonde man, just like Jim had described, running away from the dorms. With the new evidence, the courts were forced to let him go. It was amazing news. On the day of his release, I wanted to plan a huge welcome home party. I didn't invite most of his friends because they'd all turned their backs on him when they thought he was a murderer. Instead, we had a couple of his high school buddies and all of our family. I ordered a bunch of pepperoni pizzas because I knew that was Jim's favorite food. Mom picked him up from prison and drove him back. When he arrived, we all jumped out and said, "Surprise!" He instantly started crying. Even though he'd only been behind bars for a couple of months, he looked like a completely different person. He'd lost a lot of weight, and his skin was extremely pale. He walked right up to me and gave me a huge hug. I could feel how bony he'd gotten since the last time we hugged. "Thank you," he whispered. After that, the party went really well. Jim slowly turned back into his old self. He even joked around and told us some crazy stories about his time in prison. And then the doorbell rang. I jumped up to answer it, but Jim stopped me. "Let me get it," he said. I handed him some cash, and then he walked toward the door. When he opened the door, a blonde delivery guy was standing on the porch with 3 pizza boxes in his arms. Jim's back was to me, so I couldn't see his expression, but I saw the look on the delivery guy's face. He seemed horrified. The guy instantly dropped the pizzas and ran away. Jim turned back toward us. "That's him! That's the real murderer!" Mom grabbed her phone to call 911. Jim looked at us once more, and then raced out of the house. "Wait!" I screamed. That blonde man was a killer, and it wasn't safe for Jim to face him alone. He didn't stop, so I ran off too. I couldn't lose my brother again. I saw Jim halfway down the street. He was running ridiculously fast. I struggled to catch up. My heart was pounding. I couldn't see the delivery guy, but I guess Jim could. He changed directions, heading into the park, and I kept following. By the time I caught up, I saw Jim standing in the middle of the park. The delivery guy was facing him, looking terrified. "Don't hurt me," the man said. "You killed my roommate and blamed me. Why shouldn't I kill you? Stop!" I shouted. Both men turned toward me. "Stay out of this," Jim said. His eyes were narrowed. He wanted revenge. The man fumbled with his tiny backpack. He pulled out a pistol and pointed it right at Jim. "Don't move or I'll shoot!" Jim stepped closer. He wasn't afraid of the gun at all. "You wouldn't." Why would he say that? He already knew that the guy was a murderer. But the man was shaking so badly that he could barely aim the gun. "Please, I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Don't..." "Put the gun down!" Jim shouted. The blonde man whimpered. He looked so scared, but he still cocked the gun. Jim charged toward him. Before the man could fire, Jim grabbed his hands and twisted. The gun flew through the air and landed in the dirt. I rushed over and grabbed the gun while Jim wrestled the man to the ground. I'd never used a gun before and felt terrible in my hands. I hated it. Jim punched the man hard. Then he held him down. The man tried to twist away, but Jim wouldn't let go. "Shoot him!" Jim yelled at me. "No," the man said. "Please." "Shoot him now!" Jim looked at me, and as he said that, it gave the blonde man the opportunity to wriggle out of his grip. He shoved Jim backward and then punched him in the stomach. I couldn't let him hurt my brother. Without thinking, I fired the gun. A huge bang shot through the air. Then the blonde man fell backwards onto the ground, dead. Jim slowly stood back up and walked toward me. "You did the right thing," he said. I dropped the gun. It took a few seconds for reality to finally sink in. I'd killed somebody. I'd protected my brother, and it was all in self-defense, but I'd actually shot somebody. He wrapped me in another hug. I pulled away. What did he mean when he said that he didn't tell anyone what he saw? Jim took a deep breath. You really want to know? Yes! Okay, fine. This was Max. He witnessed the murder and ran off. He was too afraid to come forward, and it looks like he bought a gun for protection. So, he didn't kill your roommate? I asked. Nope, I did. I've always been guilty. I was worried he'd go to the police, but he can't now, thanks to you. Why are you telling me this? Because I know you won't say anything. If you go along with my story, then you'll be a hero for stopping him. But if you tell the truth, well, then that makes you a murderer too. Police will probably be here soon, so you have some time to think of what you'll say. Answer seems pretty obvious, though. When the police came, I let Jim do all the talking. He told them that he'd recognized Max as the murderer. He said that Max attacked him again, and I swooped in as a hero. When the police asked me if I had anything to add, I told them no. So that's how my brother got away with murder, and how he roped me into it as well. I'm telling you this story because I need to get this off my chest. I'll never be brave enough to tell this to the police. My sister Becca and I had a strained relationship since she manipulated our parents into giving her a significant chunk of my college fund so she could buy stuff. Of course, she didn't tell our parents that. She told them she was starting a business. When my mom told me about it over the phone all those years ago, I admit even I was convinced she had a good plan. I was excited for Becca. For so many years, she struggled with her mental health, and it made it difficult for her to hold down a job. It sounded like she was finally getting her life together. That was until I went over to her house and found her high out of her mind. She couldn't even answer the door. I had to crawl through an open window. Her home was a mess. In every room, you could find discarded tinfoils and used syringes. I confronted her, and she admitted that she used the money to buy bad things. I didn't talk to her for years after that. My mom would give me updates on her, although I never asked. My sister ended up meeting a guy who was really good for her. He was able to care for her and support her as she recovered from her addiction. A year into being clean, she became pregnant. In light of this, I reached out to mend our relationship. I didn't want to miss out on knowing my niece, and I missed my sister. Since the last time I saw her, she had gained a considerable amount of weight, but she glowed with happiness, content with her life. That was until her boyfriend was struck by a drunk driver coming home one night. He was declared dead on the scene. We all worried about Becca, but we knew her boyfriend at least had a life insurance policy that would help her get by financially for a little while. After her boyfriend's death, she stopped calling us. She fell into a deep depression. We tried to help and support her, but she pushed us out. Since her boyfriend was why she got clean in the first place, I feared his passing would cause her to slip back into old habits. I prayed she would stay strong for her daughter. A couple of years passed, with minimal contact from Becca. One day, out of the blue, she called me and asked for help. I was overjoyed to hear from her and hoped all was well. Becca didn't want to make small talk and got straight to business. She told me she planned to undergo weight loss surgery and would need someone to help take care of her and her daughter while she recovered. I was surprised she could afford a procedure like that, but I wasn't going to interrogate her about her finances. I told her I would be happy to help. Before I could offer to drive her to and from the hospital, she told me the plan. I was to stay home with her daughter while she went through the operation, and she would take an Uber home. I asked how many nights she would need to stay in the hospital, and she told me she would be able to come home the same day. I found that odd, but I didn't question it due to my lack of knowledge surrounding weight loss surgery. The day of the procedure came, and I went over to Becca's house. Becca had already left for the surgery by the time I arrived. I hadn't seen my niece for 2 years. She was a ray of sunshine the last time I saw her. Nothing could wipe a smile from her face. I remember one time she was running around in my parents' backyard, fell, and landed flat on her face. She jumped up, giggled, and continued running around like she never tripped. The door was unlocked when I walked in. My niece remembered me, and a small smile appeared on her face. Nothing like what her smile used to be. She was different now. Her face was flat. Clouds now shrouded her light. She slowly walked over to hug my legs. "Hey, sweetie," I said to her. "Where's your mom?" She told me she left already. I asked, "How long ago did she leave? How long have you been by yourself?" She shrugged in response. I was worried. I had a sick feeling in my stomach. My niece used to be so vibrant, but now she felt muted. Over the course of the day, I saw her light return in small ways. We went to the park. I took her to Target and bought her a new toy. She helped me bake cookies. It was a good day. Becca came home much later that night. She limped into the house. At the sight of her mother, my niece retreated back into the shell I found her in that morning. I felt my stomach tighten at this observation. My sister looked horrible. All the color was drained from her face, and she was incredibly thin. She was as thin as she was when she was using stuff. Even her cheeks were hollow. Alarms started going off in my head because there was no way a weight loss surgery would have that effect so fast. She snapped at me to help her to the bedroom, and I obliged. I helped her into bed and asked what I should do for follow-up care. "I don't know," she said angrily. "Just keep my daughter busy. I'll be fine." I took a step back. I didn't understand why Becca had such an attitude. I told her, "I'm just trying to help." "Go help somewhere else," she scowled. Not knowing entirely how to react to her coldness, I left to find my niece. I helped my niece get ready for bed. As I said goodnight, she gave me a big hug. As her arms wrapped around me, she whispered, "Please don't leave." I withdrew from the hug to look at her face. "You have me for the next couple days, and then maybe after I can come visit you." "No! Don't ever leave! You can't leave!" Tears began to gather in her little brown eyes. Through her tears, she explained that her mother had started to become fuzzy after her father died. My niece said that her mom would go into her room and shut the door for days at a time. Sometimes she would hear her mom coughing. She told me the coughing came with a funky smell. My heart dropped when she told me my sister started bringing around strange men who would only stay one night. I knew she was using bad things again, and from the sounds of it, she may have been selling her body to get money for it. It explained her hollow cheeks. She was already thin from using the powder and pills again, not from the weight loss surgery. It made me wonder what procedure she just got. Becca must have burned through the life insurance money and was desperate for more. I promised my niece I wouldn't let anything bad happen to her. I kissed my niece's forehead to wish her goodnight. In the background, I heard my sister throwing up. I went into the bathroom, and she was lurched over the toilet, vomiting blood. "What happened?" "It's fine! Go away!" Becca yelled. "It is not fine. I'm calling the ambulance," I responded. "No!" Becca tried to get up to stop me, but grabbed her stomach like she was in pain. She lifted her shirt to check her wound, and that's when I saw the poorly sewn together incision on her lower abdomen. Blood dripped through the stitches. As we waited for the ambulance, I demanded she explain herself. I confronted her about bringing strangers to the house and scolded her for putting her daughter in danger. Becca started to cry. After her boyfriend died, she was okay for a little while. The pressure of life and providing for her daughter began to weigh on her, and she needed an escape, a momentary reprieve. So she hit up one of her old friends who used to sell her things. He was still in business and supplied her with what she needed. When she started having trouble paying for them, He showed her a place on the deep web where she could sell herself. People sold everything on this website, from substance to organs. It was more private than Reddit or OnlyFans, so my parents and I could never figure out what she was up to. She posted an ad and was surprised by how many clients she got. However, it wasn't enough to cover the debt she had racked up after she used up the life insurance policy. She looked through the website her friend had showed her for other ways to make a quick buck, and saw that someone was looking for a kidney. She figured she had one to spare, and the payout was big enough to cover her debt and then some. Becca admitted that she was beginning to think of using her daughter to make money, and selling a kidney felt like a better option. I slapped her. How could she even consider doing that to her daughter? As she confessed this to me, the ambulance pulled up. They strapped her to the gurney and rushed her to the hospital. Turns out the deep web surgeon left gauze in her abdomen. They weren't able to save her in time. The wound became infected, and the infection spread rapidly. I asked the doctor how it could have gotten infected so fast. He told me that he's heard of people trying to sell organs on the black market, how my sister did, and that sometimes the person doing the operation will intentionally mess up or inject them with something so they won't live long enough to have to pay them. We never received any money for her donation. My niece now lives with my parents. I try to see her as often as I can. She's in therapy, and I can tell her light is returning, slowly. My sister Daisy and I were in desperate need of a long vacation. Being the owners of our own business, a small but very popular bakery in Chicago, we had our plates full. After the daily breakfast rush, there was still a very long shift of incessant baking and preparing the doughs for the next day. At the end of every shift, we were beyond exhausted. And after 2 years straight with no breaks, completely burned out. So when Daisy approached me with the idea of us taking a long vacation to rest and recharge, I was all in. She had been seeing this guy for a couple of months who owned a gorgeous cottage, her words, near Lake Michigan that served as a short-term rental. And it was popular, with a capital P. When she showed me the pictures on the website, I could barely believe my eyes. Daisy wasn't lying when she said it was gorgeous, and all the other dozens of people that had already stayed there thought so too. Our well-deserved vacation couldn't come soon enough. The cottage was around 3 hours away, but since our commute to the bakery was just a short walk, neither of us was used to driving long distance anymore. So Joe, Daisy's not-yet boyfriend, was kind enough to drive us there. Turns out his family owned a couple of short-term rentals in the area, and he would spend the week setting up 2 of them for tourists from outside the country. The other houses are 30 miles away, so whatever you need, give me a call, Joe explained as he was heading out. Service can be spotty from time to time, but worst case scenario, the closest neighbor lives just 4 miles away. His name is Mr. Willard. After giving us the codes for the security system and explaining how to use the kerosene heater in the pantry in case the power went out, and went on his merry way. Without further ado, we took to exploring the property right away. The cottage had 3 suites with lavish bathtubs, an open-concept kitchen beside a spacious living room, and a front and back porch that had me dying to sit on a recliner and read for hours on end. There was a tool shed about a quarter mile from the house, and about 2 miles after that, a lovely pond that was deep and clean enough for us to swim. It was nearly perfect. The only downside being that it was too deep into the woods for my liking, and we still saw no sign of the lake. But Joe was letting us stay there for free, so I wasn't going to complain. All I wanted was to relax and forget about work for an entire week. I wished I could say that my first night at the college was every bit of the dreamscape I hoped it would be. But as someone who grew up amongst the city traffic and the constant noise of humans everywhere, the stillness of the forest was hard to get used to. Every ruffle of leaves on the ground and occasional nocturnal creature sounded too foreign to my ears, keeping me on edge. On the morning of our second day, I woke up to one of my matching sets of underwear sitting atop the kitchen counter. Daisy was not unfamiliar with playing pranks on others, but that was a very odd and nonsensical prank to play. I mean, what was the reasoning behind it? Either way, I went to put it back inside the drawer, but had the distinct impression there were fewer items inside than when I first put things away. Exhaustion and stress were probably messing with my perception, so I brushed those concerns aside. Midway into our third night, I was jolted awake by a piercing scream coming from Daisy's room. "There was a man in here!" she said, shaking, once I reached the door. I opened my eyes and he was standing right there! There being the small balcony that connected her bedroom to the back porch. I checked every single tile of that balcony, but found no evidence of said man. I suggested that we should call Joe to investigate, or, in the very least, to stay with us for 1 or 2 days. But Daisy said he had called the day before, informing her that he had to travel further up north to deal with a squatter situation. He was now 7 hours away, and otherwise unable to come to us at least until day 6. Now, convinced that the cottage was haunted, Daisy announced that we would sleep in the same bedroom until we left. I suppose the isolation, coupled with Daisy's paranormal theories, were getting to me, because by day 5, I had this eerie sensation that we were being watched. All the time, I could almost feel the weight of invisible eyes following us around the house. The eerie feeling only got worse once I confirmed without a doubt that some underwear of mine had gone missing. There was no explaining it away this time as some lapse of memory or a prank from Daisy. I made sure to remember where I'd left it, inside the small laundry basket in my bathroom. Daisy confessed to me that she also noticed some of her items had gone missing. In her case, toothbrush, hairbrush, and her favorite pair of fuzzy socks. Frightened, alone, stranded, and with no phone service, we decided to venture outside into the woods. Joe mentioned that the closest neighbor wasn't far off from us, so we could use his phone to call Joe and figure out what to do after that. Except we walked, and walked, and walked, and didn't find this guy's house. Actually, we found no houses around. At all. There was nothing but miles of untouched woods ahead of us. With just our phone lights to guide us, it was already pitch black when we stumbled towards the fence that marked the property lines. On our way back towards the cottage, Daisy noticed a faint light coming from the tool shed. We hadn't been back here since the day we arrived, so we hadn't noticed it before. It was unlocked, too. We were mortified to find out the unassuming outside hid a space more reminiscent of a small office than anything else. The only tools inside were a bunch of electronic gadgets, tons of wires, and notebooks. 2 of them. "What the hell is this?" I asked, halfway inside the shed, already opening one of the notebooks. Daisy's confused expression told me she was as clueless as I was. A weird web page was opened on the forum of a website called Ask and You Shall Receive, although the actual URL seemed more like someone had had a stroke over the keyboard. A note right at the top of the page by the username Jin read, "The time has come, friends. For the first time, you can bid for a chance to interact face-to-face with our latest guests. We'll have 5 games to choose from. Peekaboo, Simon Says, Hide and Seek, Capture the Flag, and Tag You're It. As a request from our seasoned players, and to make things more interesting, for our final game, electricity will be out until dawn, and the phone signal blockers will only be on until 3 a.m. Can you finish the game in time? As always, highest bidder takes the cake." What the hell was going on? I clicked on the tab named Game 1, Peekaboo, and found a video file showing the outside of the cottage. Our cottage. I couldn't click fast enough. Most of the footage was uneventful, except for the part where a lanky man dressed in all black approached the cottage at around 2 a.m. and stood outside one of the windows, touching him. Once he was done, he went around to another window and did the same. We didn't have to guess who he was looking at. He was outside our bedroom windows. Simon Says showed a burly-looking man entering the cottage once we were asleep. No surprises there. He had the security code, taking some things from my drawer and placing my matching set of underwear where I'd find it. Hide and Seek and Capture the Flag had been the man Daisy swore she saw inside her bedroom, and the other thief that stole some of her things. My fingers trembled when I clicked on the last tab. Game 5, set for today, was Tag You're It. And We were supposed to be it. I felt sick, and I figured that Daisy wasn't much different. I didn't know how or why, but these people were bidding on an opportunity to mess with us. And it said there that the game had not one, but 2 winning bids. Probably one for each of us. Damn, that's even worse. And it was clear Joe was behind it all. Who else had access to us in the house? There was no other explanation. So I told Daisy just that. "This isn't... He wouldn't do that," she pleaded, eyes full of tears. "He's one of the good ones, Mel." "No good or sane person would do shit like this, Dee. He's a psycho, and so are his crazy psycho customers." We were wasting precious time, so I told her to search one computer for all the footage she could find to narrow down the location of the cameras. From what we saw, there were around 9 cameras inside the house, and 2 outside facing the back and front porch. Luckily, none were facing the woods or inside the shed. The pantry was also clear. With our phones practically dead after using them as flashlights, and with no electricity to charge them, we couldn't risk wandering into the woods in the dark. We wouldn't get far, that was certain. All that was left was to go back to the house and prepare for the confrontation with those people. Whatever happens today, Dee, we have to make it. When we got back to the house, we weren't surprised to find that everything was dark. The men from the footage all came around midnight to 1 a.m., so we still had some time. Hopefully. The only source of light we had were 3 boxes with dozens of emergency candles Daisy found inside the pantry, so we scattered them across the cottage. Made the place look like the set of a romantic music video from the 80s. If only. It was cold without electricity to heat the house, but I had other plans for the kerosene heater, so we would have to bear the cold. The cottage had a gas stove, so we were still able to heat up water for our bathtubs. We purposely left the kitchen much darker since we didn't want them to keep tabs on us there, where we could grab knives. All there was left to do was to fill up our tubs, 1 bucket at a time. By the time everything was done and 1 a.m. rolled around, we were both shivering from more than just the cold. I drenched myself and the entire bedroom and bathroom in my strongest perfume and laid in bed to wait for the right time. And I waited, and waited, and waited. However, long after, I heard a faint creaking of wood coming from the living room. I knew then that the time had come. Imagining he wouldn't have a way to check for the cameras once already inside, I slowly moved towards the bedroom, pretending as though I was ready for a bath. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at the liquid inside it, careful not to touch any of it. The candles flickered ever so slightly when he got inside the bathroom, but still I didn't move. Only when he grabbed me by the hair abruptly, intent on catching me off guard, that I grabbed the air freshener by the sink and sprayed all over his eyes. He shoved me, and I hit the cold floor, hard. But it didn't matter, because he was right where I needed him. One strong kick, and he stumbled over the edge of the tub, falling inside it. I saw his eyes widen in surprise once he noticed the smell coming from the liquid, and the realization that it wasn't water came a few seconds too late. He opened his mouth, but before he could say or do anything, I knocked a candle off the vanity and into the tub. It went up in flames like a bonfire, and so did he. As he thrashed around inside the tub, spilling kerosene all over the bathroom, the fire spread rapidly. He wasn't going down without a fight, so I got out of there as fast as I could, headed towards Daisy's room. But her screams reached me faster. I got inside the bedroom to find her pinned under a man wearing a balaclava, with a kitchen knife lodged on her shoulder. The room had a faint smell of burning, but no active spots of fire. I realized, belatedly, that the man had a bucket beside him, the same bucket filled with kerosene that we used for the tubs, and he immediately spilled it over himself and Daisy. When I tried to move forward, he took one of the candles nearby and hovered it over Daisy's terrified face. "Wouldn't do that if I were you, chickie," he said, sneering. "That would kill you too." "Fine by me." I could feel heat slowly spreading behind me, and that told me that the fire from my bedroom was catching. Soon enough, it wouldn't matter if he decided to toss the candle or not. The whole place was about to catch on fire. Daisy's pleading eyes found mine, and she focused on them, nodding. She knew the risks we were both facing, and her now determined stare told me that she would rather get out of this badly burnt than inside a body bag. Holding my own kitchen knife, I prepared myself for whatever came next. Daisy's smartwatch went off, loudly, letting us know that it was 3 a.m. The man noticed this too, checking his watch in a reflex. It was only a few seconds of distraction, but it was all the time we would ever get. I lunged at him with all my strength, and the impact caused him to tumble back, freeing Daisy. The impact also caused the small bedside table to wobble, and one of the candles fell on the floor beside us. We watched as the small flame grew bigger and bigger, spreading over the thick carpet, slowly reaching us. He must not have been as ready to die as he said, because once the flames reached his leg soaked in kerosene and caught on fire, he shoved me aside in favor of smothering the flames. Daisy and I took the opportunity to get the hell out of there. But not before grabbing the 2 remaining gallons of kerosene from the pantry, spilling one all over the inside of the cottage, and lighting it on our way out. Then, we ran into the woods towards the tool shed. I was about to give it the same treatment when Daisy stopped me, filling a box with the notebooks, flashcards, and other random gadgets that she found lying around. A few miles ahead, we found a car parked, with the key still in the ignition. Yes! These monsters really weren't expecting much of a fight, and it showed. To hell with them and all the others watching, too. We packed our box of evidence in and drove away from the cottage as fast as we could. As the rear view mirror glowed bright orange and the trees were engulfed by the flames, Daisy and I shared a knowing look. Maybe we should pay Joe a visit.
I'm the writer and artist of a pretty famous webcomic. I won't tell you my name, but you might have seen my stuff. I have a big fan base. My life was going really well until a month ago when I lost all of my money. My brother Peter had convinced me to invest in some kind of cryptocurrency, and I was stupid enough to trust him. For a while, I was making a lot of money, and then everything crashed and my entire savings were wiped out. I had just bought a house, and now I was in danger of losing it. As soon as I found out, I called Peter to yell at him. I'd never been so angry. He apologized, of course, but he acted like it was some honest mistake. Stop being a cat. No risk, no reward, he said. I felt like strangling him. I told him that I had no idea how to dig myself out of this, and he calmly told me to come over and talk to him directly. He said he had a plan to make it all back. I never wanted to see my brother again, but without any other options, I drove over. Peter lived in a trailer park on the edge of town. He didn't have a lot of money, and I honestly don't know how I was so stupid enough to follow his investment advice. He let me in and guided me to his computer. There was a very strange-looking website on the screen. He said he had gone into the dark web and found a way to get back all the money I'd lost. As soon as he said dark web, I wanted to leave. I don't know why, but I waited to hear him out. Peter explained that we were on a job board where clients would pay us huge amounts to perform all kinds of tasks. Because it was on the dark web, everything was protected and anonymous, and our payments would come through in crypto. I told him I wasn't interested, and he showed me some of the postings. One gig was for $30,000, another was for $230,000. This was big money, so I asked him what the specific tasks were. He clicked on the $30,000 one. It was for a human eye. I'm not going to give up my eye, I told him. He shrugged and went to another listing. This was for the crypto equivalent of $100,000. See, this one's easy, he said. The listing said it was for a 1-hour film shoot. It had no other information. I told Peter to send a message asking what the film shoot entailed. I assumed it was something very illegal. It might even be a film or something. No matter what they said, I wasn't going to do it, but I was still pretty curious. Peter explained that the clients refused to give out any additional information. You have to sign up and hope for the best. I'm not going to do that, I told him. I was about to walk out of there when he said, "Too late. I already signed you up." I ran to his computer to look. He typed in my full name and address. Underneath it was a one-word message. Confirmed. I was so angry, I punched him in the face. "You made me lose all my money, and now you're signing me up for this?" "I was just trying to help," he said. His nose was bleeding. "Cancel it," I told him. "Now." He said he couldn't. On this site, all deals were final. I got a notification on my phone saying that a new digital account had been formed in my name. All the money had already been transferred to it. Without saying anything, I left his trailer and drove straight to the police. I told the officer what my brother had done, but he said there was nothing he could do for me. He was an older guy, so I assumed he didn't know anything about the dark web. He said that if I'm ever in immediate danger, I should call him. Defeated and scared, I went back home. I made sure all my doors and windows were locked. I knew that the client was going to find me, but I didn't know where or when. For days, I was in constant fear. Peter tried to call me a couple of times, but I refused to answer. I just stayed at home and waited, fearing the worst. Then one night, I saw a figure sneaking around in my yard. I hid behind the curtains and looked out. It was a tall man, dressed all in black. He had a single sheet of paper in his hand. He placed it on my doorstep and then walked back into the shadows. When I was sure he'd gone, I went outside to see what he'd left me. The paper had my name written at the top. Right under it were the words, "Filming schedule. 10 a.m. filming begins. 10:15, tongue. 10:30, fingers." That was everything. I took the paper straight to the police station where the same officer met with me. He read through the note, and once again, he didn't seem too concerned. He said that if I was worried that someone would come for me, then I should be at the police station at 10 a.m. No one would be able to hurt me if I was surrounded by cops. It seemed like a good idea, though I worried that if the dark web people didn't find me at the scheduled time, then they'd come after me later. I didn't want that hanging over me. I was done living in fear. So I called Peter and asked him to be at my house the next morning. I told him that I was still upset, but that we could finally hash things out face to face. I didn't tell him that I wouldn't be there. He happily agreed. The next morning, I woke up early and drove straight to the station. At 9:30, Peter called to say that he just arrived at my house. "Just wait there," I told him. "I'll be back soon." I didn't hear from him after that. By 11, I decided that I'd waited long enough. I drove back home to see if Peter had dealt with the client. His car was still out front, so I took that as a good sign. I walked inside and felt like throwing up. Peter was sitting on my couch. As I stepped closer, I saw that all of his fingers had been twisted off. I ran to him. "Peter, what happened?" He tried to explain, but he couldn't form any words. His tongue had been cut out. The client had finished their filming, and it was so much more horrible than I'd expected. They'd mutilated my brother, which would have been me if I hadn't asked him to come over to my place. I pulled out my phone and called an ambulance. As we waited for it to arrive, I wrapped towels around his hands to slow the bleeding. Peter tried to say something, but the sound was unintelligible. "I'm so sorry," I told him, feeling terrible for what had become of my brother. But there was another part of me that knew he'd gotten exactly what he deserved. "It's like you told me," I said. "No risk, no reward."
Angela and I became friends in kindergarten on the playground. Every recess, we would sprint to the swings to claim them before anyone else. Swinging back and forth, she became my best friend. Even as a small child, I cherished our friendship. She glowed with joy and would infect other people with her light-hearted spirit. I felt lucky someone so kind wanted to be my friend. All that changed when we were 16 and her mom took her own life. It's like this darkness took root in her after she found her mom dead in the bathtub. Losing a parent would be hard for anyone, let alone how she lost her mom, so I tried to be there for her. I tried to be patient, knowing that grief is a complicated process. I never imagined it would turn my once glowing friend into a monster. I remember watching Angela at the funeral. Her once bright blue eyes now look like an empty, dull gray. She sat slumped over in the pew, staring at her feet the whole time. Her dad patted her back to comfort her, but she never cried. It felt like she was somewhere else. She checked out entirely. When I tried to talk to her afterward, she walked past me like she never knew me. She withdrew from me completely. Her sister would let me know how she was doing from time to time because she knew I cared. Her family was concerned she was pushing me away along with her other friends. Honestly, I thought I just needed to be patient, and she would return to me in time. As weeks passed, Angela's actions grew more and more concerning. She seemed to be taking her mom's death harder than everyone else, which is fair since she's the one who found her. Can you imagine a more terrible thing? Everyone was worried about her. She started to disappear for hours, only to reappear like she never left. Angela tried hard to fake it and hide her grief, but you could see the pain in her eyes. Her family grew more uneasy as she started to develop a fascination with the occult. It started with her getting into New Age spiritualism, but quickly morphed into something more sinister. None of us anticipated how sinister this new hobby of hers would become. Her sister said Angela covered the walls in her room with weird markings, and she would hear her chanting in another language late at night. Around this time, I started having nightmares every night. I would be walking in a room shrouded in fog. I would turn around and see nothing but darkness and fog. Sometimes figures in the fog would approach me. The disturbing part of these dreams is that everyone ended with Angela rushing out of the fog to grab me. I would wake up haunted by her face, creepy grin, and empty eyes. The dreams went on for weeks. My birthday approached, and to my surprise, Angela reached out to me about doing something together. I was ecstatic. I thought my patience paid off, and I would have my friend back. The dreams made me a little uneasy, but they were just dreams. Maybe I had them because I missed her. I texted her sister because I thought her reaching out to me was proof that she was healing. Her sister was surprised she reached out to me, but agreed that this was a step in the right direction. Angela told me she had the whole night planned. She wanted to go to this new Mexican restaurant she heard good things about. She knows Mexican is my favorite. Angela asked if I wanted to invite anyone else, but I told her I was happy with just her. I didn't want to overwhelm her after she isolated herself from everyone. The day came and the night felt heavy under the blood-red moon. I remember thinking, how fun, it's a full moon. I went to the address Angela gave me and it led me to an abandoned warehouse. The place had one lamppost that illuminated the barren area. It was in the middle of nowhere. I stood by the lamppost looking around for Angela. The longer I stood there, the more it felt like the darkness became thicker around the circle of light. All I could hear was the rusted doors of the warehouse swaying in the wind. Out of the darkness, I heard footsteps on the gravel road. "Angela?" I called out, my voice echoing into the dark. There was no response, just the sound of the old metal doors. I pulled out my phone to text Angela. She must have sent me the wrong address or something. Just as I was about to dial her number, a chill ran down my spine. I could tell something was off, but I wanted to trust Angela. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure in the shadows. My pulse quickened as I strained to make out any details of the figure. "Angela? Is that you?" I called out again, my voice trembling. Again, no response. I hesitated between running back to my car and trying to figure out what was going on. I summoned all my courage to take a step into the darkness. The figure remained still. "Angela, this isn't funny," I said. And then, just as suddenly as it had happened, The figure melted back into the darkness, leaving me alone at the abandoned warehouse. My heart pounded as I stood there, trying to understand what had just happened. Was Angela playing some kind of prank? I glanced around, half expecting the figure to reappear at any moment. Maybe Angela would come running up behind me to scare me, but I remained alone, deserted. With a shaky sigh, I pulled out my phone again to call Angela. It rang once, twice, before going to voicemail. "Angela, where are you?" I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Something weird just happened. Call me back, okay?" I hung up, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. What if something happened to Angela? What if she was in trouble and I was just standing here doing nothing? I looked at my phone again and called Angela's sister. "Carol?" her sister said into the phone. Hi. Sorry to bother you. Did Angela mention to you what she had planned for tonight? She gave me an address to an abandoned warehouse. I just have a bad feeling." Her sister was silent for a moment. "Can you text me the address?" "Of course," I responded. "Can you let me know if you find Angela? We haven't seen or heard from her all day." "Yeah, I can do that." Her sister ended the call. As I looked up from my phone, I saw a silhouette by the old metal doors waving me down. Relief washed over me as I sprinted towards her, calling out her name. "Angela! Thank God, I was so worried." I gasped for breath. Right as I was about to reach her, she disappeared into the warehouse. Something told me not to follow her, but I had to see what was going on. It was dead silent as I walked into the warehouse. I tried to listen for breathing, but there was nothing. Just as I was fully in the warehouse, something hit me on the back of the head. Everything went black. I awoke on the floor with hands and feet bound. My eyes slowly pieced together the scene. Angela was beside me, hunched over with her back to me. "Angela, what's going on?" I asked. I looked around to see markings on the floor. It made no sense to me at all. I was in the middle of it. I pulled on my restraints, but Angela apparently knew how to tie a knot. She turned her head to look at me. She didn't say anything. She just sat there with a strange smile playing at the corner of her lips. It was a smile that sent shivers down my spine, a smile that held no warmth or sincerity. "Angela, please," I said. You're scaring me." But she just kept smiling, her eyes glinting with an unsettling light. She stood up and started chanting something in a different language as she walked around, lighting candles scattered around me. With the light from the candles, I could see more. She had a knife and a composition notebook with inconsistent scribbles all over the pages. I could only make out a few words. Mom, sacrifice, blood moon. My stomach churned. Did she plan on sacrificing me? "What are you doing?" I whispered, but she didn't respond. She was entranced with her chant. She sat at my feet meditating, still chanting. At that moment, I realized that I lost the friend I had once cherished. Tears crowded my eyes. "This won't bring her back," I tried to tell her. "This won't work. Please, Angela, untie me." I pulled at my restraints, but that only tightened them around my wrists and ankles. Angela continued her chant. She opened her cold, empty eyes and turned her attention towards the knife. She picked up the knife and lifted my shirt to expose my belly. I began to struggle more against my confinement. She started to carve a star onto my stomach, still chanting. I screamed as the knife cut into me. My blood oozed out of her markings. As she was about to make markings on me, I heard the metal doors creak open. "Angela?" It was Angela's father. Hearing his voice, she snapped out of her chant. Her eyes shifted between my stomach and her dad's voice. Her dad rounded the corner and saw Angela beside me, laid out. He started to cry. "Angela, baby, what are you doing?" He was exasperated. "Put the knife down, sweetie. Let's talk about this. It's the only way!" Angela screamed. "Then there is no way," her dad said as he slowly approached her. Once he was close enough, he grabbed her hand with the knife and took it from her. Angela began to sob. "But it's the only way. It'll work. I know it will." Her dad shook his head and pulled her into a hug. He looked at me and nodded before walking off with Angela. It wasn't long until her dad came back to cut me free. He apologized profusely and explained that he and Angela's sister were taking her to a mental hospital for care. They didn't know she was this far gone. After things calmed down, I asked her sister why Angela chose me, or if she knew anything. Her sister told me she looked through Angela's notebook with erratic scribbles, and it seemed like she had to sacrifice someone important to get her mom back. Her sister theorized that I was the next most important person to Angela after their family. Angela couldn't lose any more family, so I was the one she had to sacrifice. My name is Terry. I've worked for the same company for 8 years. I liked my job, and I was very good at it, but I hated how all my male coworkers kept getting promoted over me. I ended up working under several men who had much less talent and experience than me. Charles, my immediate boss, had only worked for the company for 2 years. I was the one who trained him. And now he was calling all the shots, even though he didn't know what he was doing. Last spring, Charles announced that our whole department was going to an important conference in Florida. I was excited to go, but then he pulled me aside and said that there weren't enough rooms at the resort they were staying at. Everyone had to share rooms, and since I was the only female on the staff, he thought it would be simpler for everyone if I sat this one out. Those were his exact words. Sat this one out? I can't tell you how furious I was. Normally, I didn't stand up for myself whenever Charles did anything sexist or unfair. I think that's what he was counting on. But this was my final straw. So I asked him if the room situation was the only reason I wasn't invited. He said yes. So I told him that I'd book a nearby Airbnb for myself and attend the conference anyway. He tried to argue with me, but he couldn't think of any good reasons to tell me no, so he reluctantly gave me the conference information. I was lucky enough to find an Airbnb literally next door to the resort. It was more expensive than I wanted, but I knew the extra money would be worth it. I'd get to attend all the meetings and do all the networking stuff, and then I'd go back to the privacy of my own little house. If everything worked out, I'd impress our clients and make everyone see what a mistake Charles was making by trying to alienate me. After I checked in and unpacked, I grabbed my bag of work materials and swim clothes, and I walked over to the resort. Charles must have warned the concierge about me, because the guy glared at me as I entered. I introduced myself and he handed me the itinerary. I politely thanked him and left. But when I looked at the itinerary, I saw that there were barely any scheduled meetings at all. Instead, there were items like relaxation time, golf break, and pool session. I saw a couple of my coworkers walking through the lobby, but when I approached them, they hurried off in the other direction. It seemed like no one wanted me there. I thought about just giving up and leaving early, but I knew that if I left now, I'd always regret it. So I walked straight to the breakfast buffet and acted like I was meant to be there. I saw Charles and a few of our coworkers getting their food, but they didn't notice me. "Terry?" someone shouted behind me. I turned around and saw Mr. Jenkins, one of our company's CEOs. I'd never really talked to him face to face before, but we had corresponded through emails periodically, and I knew that he liked my work. I walked over and sat at his table. "Charles said you couldn't make it," he said. "I'm glad you're here." "Me too," I said. As he picked at his food, I filled him in on all the projects I'd been working on. He seemed really impressed. For the first time, I felt like this trip was finally worth it. I could impress him. Then it didn't matter what other obstacles Charles threw in my way. While we were deep into our conversation, I saw Charles and his buddies glaring at me from another table. I smiled back at him. Then Mr. Jenkins asked me about the Heartache Initiative, a very ambitious new project that I had planned for the next quarter. I was surprised that he'd even heard of it. I filled him in on the specifics and he said, "Sounds amazing. I can't wait to hear the presentation." I wasn't planning on presenting it at the conference, but I'd be more than happy to. I had all my notes with me. When breakfast was over, Mr. Jenkins said he looked forward to seeing me at our noon meeting. Then he left. I looked down at my itinerary and saw that we didn't have a noon meeting. Either Mr. Jenkins was wrong, or, more likely, Charles had purposely given me the wrong information. I had to find out. I walked over to Charles, ready to ask him about the schedule, but he didn't give me the chance. Instead, he acted weirdly friendly. He complimented my outfit and told me how happy he was to see me. I knew he was lying. "You know what you should do?" he asked. "Try out the saunas behind the pool. You'll love it. Come with me and I'll show you." He grabbed my arm and started guiding me toward the pool. He was still pretending to be friendly, but he gripped my arm pretty tightly. He took me to the small building with 2 individual sauna rooms. One of them had an out-of-order sign, but the other was open. "Go inside, you'll love it. We don't have any meetings until tomorrow, so now's the perfect time." Once again, he was lying. He practically pushed me into the sauna. "But I'm not wearing the right clothes," I said. "You can change inside, trust me." And with that, he pushed me into the sauna and pulled the door closed behind me. I tried to open the door, but the lock was jammed. I slammed my body into it, but nothing happened. I was trapped inside. Through the door, Charles said, "You brought this on yourself, you know." Then I heard him walk away. I kept slamming into the door, but it refused to open. Charles had locked me inside. That's when I figured out what he was doing. Charles didn't want me to go to the noon meeting because he was going to make a presentation on the Hardick Initiative. He was going to steal my ideas and claim them as his own. By the time someone found me and let me out of the sauna, it would be too late. I reached into my bag to get my phone, but it was gone. Charles must have taken it while we were walking. Then I felt sweat ooze down my face. The room was heating up. Charles had turned on the sauna before he left. He wasn't trying to keep me from the meeting. He was trying to kill me. Unless someone found me soon, I'd dehydrate. I'd die. And when people finally found my body, they'd think that it was some tragic accident. I looked around the sauna for anything I could use to pry open the door. I couldn't find anything. Soon the heat was unbearable. It was so hot, I could barely breathe. Without my phone, I didn't know how long I was trapped inside, but it felt like forever. I kept beating at the door, praying that someone would hear me, but I was losing strength. Eventually, everything turned black and I passed out. When I woke up, I was lying on the ground just outside of the sauna. The hotel's concierge was shaking my shoulders, trying to wake me up. "Water," I mumbled. The man grabbed a water bottle and poured it into my mouth. I drank the whole thing in seconds. He asked me what happened, and I told him that my boss had locked me inside. The man's eyes widened. "You mean he tried to kill you?" "Apparently." "Well, thank God I found you in time. Let me help you up and I'll take you to the medic." "Wait," I said. My strength was quickly returning. I pointed up toward the security camera in the corner of the ceiling. I hadn't noticed it before. "Does that camera work?" The man glanced up. "Yeah, I think so." Good. Less than an hour later, our new meeting started. As I expected, Charles stood in front of Mr. Jenkins and all our coworkers and clients to make a presentation on the Hardick Initiative. I watched him from just outside the door as he took credit for all my work. I didn't interrupt him, though. I had another plan. Then, after Charles had made his introduction, he switched on the projector. Instead of showing slides, though, a video popped up on the screen behind him. It was the security camera footage of when he locked me in the sauna. The whole audience gasped as they saw Charles jam the lock and turn on the sauna to its hottest setting. That was when I walked into the room, still wet and red. Without saying a word, I stepped onto the stage and took the microphone from Charles's hand. As he stared at me in horror, I finished the presentation myself. The room erupted in chaos. Mr. Jenkins' face turned an alarming shade of purple, and shouts of betrayal echoed through the hall. Charles, frozen in a deer-in-the-headlights stupor, looked like he might faint. Security escorted him out, his protests drowned out by the angry murmurs of the crowd. I, however, wasn't done. The near-death experience had ignited a cold, dark fire within me. Over the next few weeks, I anonymously leaked evidence of Charles's past transgressions, incidents of harassment and discrimination he'd managed to keep under wraps. His career unraveled faster than a dropped sweater. He was fired, blacklisted, and forced to move back in with his disapproving mother in a dingy basement apartment. 1 year later, one particularly gloomy afternoon, a knock rattled the thin metal door. Charles stood there, a ragged shadow of his former self. He begged for forgiveness, for a chance to explain. I let him in, a cruel smile twisting my lips. Over lukewarm instant coffee, I listened to his sob story. He blamed the pressure, the competition, a misplaced sense of entitlement. As he droned on, I saw a flicker of something dark in his eyes. Not remorse, but a chilling spark of recognition. He understood the game now, the brutal power dynamics. When he finished, I leaned in close and whispered, "Get the hell out." My name is Bob. After my divorce, I packed up all of my stuff and moved to a small town, just outside El Paso. I wanted to get away from all the reminders of my old life in Detroit. Because I was retired, I could live anywhere, so I decided to move closer to my oldest son, Blake. Blake lived in the city itself, but I didn't want to deal with all the traffic. My new house was in an isolated community connected to El Paso by one road. It was quiet and safe. The only problem was, I didn't know how to make friends. My neighbors mostly kept to themselves. Blake visited me occasionally, but besides him, I didn't know anyone well enough to invite them over. During one of Blake's visits, I told him my problem. He suggested that I set up a Facebook account to try to find other people into the same kinds of interests as me. He told me about all the Facebook groups that are out there. After Blake left, I set up my profile and started to look for groups that were interested in NASCAR and old westerns, my two favorite things. I was able to find other guys about my age who seemed interesting, but it felt a little weird to be friends with people from other parts of the world. It wasn't a real friendship. So I decided to go local. I found a Facebook group made for the residents of my neighborhood. It had about 50 members, so most of my neighbors were already a part of it. I'm not really good at technology, but this seemed like an easier way to introduce myself than just walking door to door. It took the admin a day to accept me. Once he did, I went through all the group's posts. It seemed like most of the posts were angry complaints about theft in the area. Someone would post about a stolen Amazon package, and then a bunch of other people would comment with similar stories. I was surprised. This seemed like such a quiet neighborhood. I had no idea that there were thieves in the area. I wanted to write a post introducing myself, but I decided not to. The whole group sounded really negative. I didn't check Facebook until a couple of days later. When I did, I saw even more posts about stolen packages. One lady wrote about how her window was broken and someone had snuck in and taken her wallet. That one got a lot of comments. I felt sorry for everyone, but I still wanted to post something. So I wrote a short introduction explaining why I moved here and offering my sympathy for anyone who'd been robbed. I think it sounded pretty nice. I was about to post it when I realized that I should probably add a photo so people could see what I looked like. Most of the photos I had were with Blake, so I posted one from a dinner we had last week. Blake's arm was around my shoulder and we both looked happy. I sent the post and then turned off my phone. I figured I wouldn't get any responses right away. About an hour later, Blake came over for a surprise visit. He brought a pizza with him. Plus, he had a little housewarming present. I loved my son so much. The present was a cute little wind chime that I could hang in my backyard. It had little glass race cars, which would fit my house perfectly. We sat together and ate our pizza. Blake asked me if I had made any friends, and I told him that I just sent my first post on Facebook. So hopefully, I'll meet someone that way. He seemed curious, so he asked to see it. I pulled out my phone and opened Facebook. I was shocked to see that my post had dozens of comments. At first I was excited, but then I read the first comment. "That's him! That's the guy who stole my packages!" I kept reading, and all the other comments were the same. Everyone recognized Blake as the neighborhood thief. I didn't believe it at first, but then I read one of the last comments. "Oh my God, I think he's the one who took my race car wind chime." "Well," Blake said, "can I see?" I realized that he was still waiting to look at my phone. I pulled it away and told him to give me a second. I needed to figure out what to say. He knew that something was wrong, so he reached across the table and grabbed my phone from my hand. As soon as he looked at my screen, he knew he'd been caught. "You weren't supposed to make friends with your neighbors. Why would you do that?" He was acting like this was all my fault. "Blake," I said slowly, "what did you do?" He took a deep breath and explained that living in El Paso was more expensive than he thought. He needed extra help, so he started stealing from my neighborhood. It was the only way he'd be able to survive without losing his apartment. He didn't even have enough money to pay for his meds. "Give me the phone," I said. I was going to call the police. He kept it away from me. My son was 23, so he could overpower me pretty easily. And I didn't want to fight him, of course, but he had to pay for his actions. I told him that I was very disappointed in him. He could have just asked me for money. That was the wrong thing to say. He absolutely freaked out, screaming, "I don't need your help. I'm a grown man." I backed away from him, scared. His expression went blank, like he was moving on autopilot, and he grabbed the wind chimes off the table. Then he lunged at me, wrapping the wire of the wind chimes around my neck. I tried to tell him to stop, but I couldn't breathe. He squeezed tighter and tighter, screaming, "I'm not a failure! I'm not a failure! I'm not a failure, you fool!" I pushed him, but he wouldn't budge. He was going through an episode, and soon he'd kill me. There was nothing I could do. And then my front door burst open and 2 policemen rushed inside. They tackled Blake to the ground and handcuffed him. I pulled the wire off my neck and gasped for breath. I was alive. I watched as they dragged Blake away, kicking and screaming. When we reached the front door, I asked one of the policemen why they came, and he said that my neighbors had called. And sure enough, when I looked out the front door, I saw dozens of people standing on my yard watching the whole thing. As the police shoved Blake into the car, I walked towards my neighbors and explained that I had no idea my son had been terrorizing them for so long. No one said anything. And then all at once, my neighbors walked toward me and wrapped me in a big, comforting group hug. That was the moment I finally felt at home.
My boyfriend Joey took me to a really nice Italian restaurant. He'd gotten us reservations for 8, and we arrived right on time. The waitress took us to a table in the back of the restaurant. We sat in a dark corner, and the candle on the table made everything seem so romantic. Joey told me to pick any food that I wanted. Money was no object. Joey kept smiling at me, and I could tell that he had a big surprise planned. We'd been dating for 3 years, so the only thing that I could think of was proposal. I knew that if he proposed, I would say yes. I'd probably burst into tears too. I loved him that much. The restaurant was busy, but I felt like Joey and I were the only 2 people in the world. God, he was so handsome. When the waiter came back, I ordered a pretty large meal, and Joey asked for a salad. I thought that was strange, as Joey loved to eat. I guess he could see the confused look on my face because he explained, "I'm too nervous to eat a lot." "Why are you nervous?" I asked coyly. He said, "Because I'm about to ask you something important." My heart fluttered. This was it. He was going to propose. "Go ahead," I told him. "Okay, do you see that man over there?" he asked. He nodded toward another table, where an extremely ugly old man sat by himself eating breadsticks. This was not how I was expecting things to go. Yeah. His name is Reginald," Joey said, "and I showed him your picture. He seemed very impressed." "By my picture?" I asked. "He thinks you're beautiful, and he'd like to get to know you better." "What?" I screamed. Joey took a deep breath, and his smile disappeared. I realized that it wasn't an excited smile. It was a nervous smile. Very slowly, he explained that he had converted all of his savings into some meme coin digital currency without telling me. He lost everything. I was furious. Joey had already gotten burned in his get-rich-quick schemes before. But to think that he lost thousands of dollars? And what does that have to do with Reginald? I asked. Joey explained that he figured out a way to earn everything back on the dark web. His friend showed him an auction site where anonymous people would place bids on everything. He didn't have anything valuable to sell, except me. Are you trying to sell me to that creep? I asked. I took a long drink of my champagne. Just for the night, Joey said. But you have to agree to whatever he wants. And when you come back in the morning, he'll transfer $25,000 into our savings account. I wanted to punch Joey in the face. I couldn't believe he would do this. No, I said. Joey, we're done. It's over. I threw down my napkin and got out of my chair. Joey didn't stop me. I expected him to say something, but he just watched me leave. When I reached to the door, I looked over my shoulder one last time at my boyfriend. I caught him giving a little thumbs up to Reginald across the room. I took an Uber back home and packed up all my stuff just to get out of there. I knew I couldn't take everything with me, but I didn't feel safe staying here another night. I filled a briefcase with my essentials and waited at the front door for my sister, Lainey, to pick me up. I was going to stay with her until I could find a space of my own. Lainey said that she'd be there in 10 minutes, and I prayed that Joey wouldn't come back until after I was gone. Eventually, I saw Lainey park her blue Nissan in front of the house. I was about to run outside, but I realized that I'd forgotten my toothbrush in the bathroom. I ran back in to grab it. It took me 30 seconds at most. Then I went outside to meet Lainey, but she wasn't there. Her car was still parked outside, but it was empty. I looked all around my front yard, but there was no sign of my sister, and I started to panic. I pulled out my phone to call the police when I saw something move behind the bushes. I walked closer, hoping that Lainey was there, but instead, I saw Reginald. He followed me back to my house. He had a dirty rag in his hand. He didn't see me, though. He was too busy staring at the ground. I looked through the leaves and saw my sister's body lying at his feet. He must have chloroformed her. I know I should have called 911, but I wasn't thinking straight. I was both angry and terrified. Without realizing what I was doing, I walked closer to Reginald. "Get away from her," I said. He turned to me and smiled. "I won't hurt her," he whispered, his voice surprisingly high. A little weird baby doll voice coming out of a grizzled old man. "The deal was for you, and on the web, all deals are final." And with that, he ran toward me. I tried to run back toward the house and lock myself inside, but he was too fast. He grabbed me by the arm and spun me around to face him. He was still holding a chloroform-coated rag. "Wait!" I screamed. I knew I couldn't fight back, but maybe I could reason with him. "All deals are final," he repeated, raising the rag to my mouth. "Stop! What was the deal? What was the deal?" "I get you for one night," he said. $25,000, and I can do whatever I want, as long as I don't leave any lasting damage." "Why me?" "Why not you?" he said. I could smell the chemical coming off of the rag as he pushed it towards my face. I knew that if I took a single breath, I'd instantly lose consciousness. So I held my breath and kept my mouth shut. I couldn't hold my breath forever, though. I closed my eyes and pretended to pass out. He loosened his grip on me, which gave me the opportunity to twist out of his hands. Now that the rag was no longer pressed against my face, I shouted, "New deal!" He froze, intrigued. "Take Joey instead," I offered. "But I want you. 10,000 for Joey, and you can leave as much lasting damage as you want. That's a better deal, right?" He considered my offer. Then he reached out his hand. For a horrible moment, I thought he was going to attack me again, but instead, he reached out to shake my hand. We did, and then he wordlessly walked inside the house. I went straight to Lainey, but I helped her get into the car and drove us back to her place. As we were driving away, we passed Joey driving back to the house. I saw him for just a second through the car windows, but thankfully he didn't see me. That was the last time I ever saw my boyfriend. He's been missing ever since. And the next morning, $10,000 was transferred into my account.
I used to work the night shift at a 24-hour buffet. It was an easy job, but I had to deal with a lot of really weird people. We weren't in a nice part of town, and the customers that came in at 2 or 3 in the morning were always a little sketchy. I'd worked there 3 years though, and I always felt safe. Except for last Saturday, the night I quit. I was reloading the salad bar when a group of 12 walked in and sat at our biggest table in the back. My coworker James seated them, so I didn't get to see them up close. But they were all wearing loose white robes and had long black hair. Male or female, it didn't matter. They all had straight jet black hair down to their waists. I knew they were a cult as soon as I saw them. The tension in the air was obvious, and the way they just obediently sat down and folded their hands without saying anything seemed very cult-like. I looked at them from across the room. None of them were moving or doing anything at all. Then I noticed the short guy at the foot of the table. He seemed like their leader. I noticed the others glance toward him, as if they were asking for permission. Then he'd nod to them, and they'd go get their food. I just finished reloading the vegetables, so I was technically on my break at the time. But instead of going outside for a smoke, I walked toward that table. I needed to see this group up close. I was just too curious. I wasn't scared of them or anything. So I walked over and asked how they were enjoying their food. None of them acknowledged me in any way. They all lowered their heads. Most of them were looking down to avoid my eye contact, but a few glanced over to their leader to silently ask them what they should do. The leader just looked away. When it was obvious that no one in the group was going to acknowledge me, I said, "Okay, let me know if you need anything." Then I started to walk away. But before I did, a cult member kicked my foot while I was passing him. It could have been an accident. He might have just been crossing or uncrossing his legs, but it felt intentional. I looked into his face, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It was my high school friend Doug. Back then, he was blonde and very fat. Now he had jet black hair down to his shoulders, and he was rail thin. But when I looked into his eyes, I knew it was him. "Doug?" I said. He instantly looked down, as if I wasn't even there. "Doug!" I tried again. "It's me, Tommy. We were in speech and debate together." Doug grimaced, but he still didn't look up. Then I noticed his eyes dart to their leader, trying to figure out what to do. I felt terrible for him. In high school, he was such an energetic, fun person. He was always the crazy fat guy at parties. Now he looked hopeless and broken. The leader rose from his chair and walked toward me. He grabbed my arm and got really close to my face. "Don't talk to my family," he said through his teeth. It sounded like a threat. "Sorry, man," I said and backed away. Doug and a few of the other cultists gasped at what I'd said. "I am not a man," the leader said. "I am God." Then he spun around and sat back down. I hurried off into the back room. I felt really creeped out. I still had 2 more hours on my shift, but I didn't want to be anywhere near them. I was supposed to patrol the area and gather up any finished plates, but I mostly stuck to the other side of the room. A bit later, I noticed Doug kneel on the floor. The guy who called himself God whispered something in his ear. Doug glanced over at me for just a second. His eyes were filled with sadness. The group left pretty soon after that. They all set their forks down at the same time, then stood, and then walked out. I was so happy they were gone, and I prayed that I'd never see them again. My heart broke to see what Doug had turned into, but I was too afraid to interfere. I finished off the rest of my shift without any other drama, but I kept thinking about those cultists. Eventually, I packed up and got ready to head out the back. I left through the back door of the buffet, which led into the tiny parking lot where employees kept their cars. I closed the door behind me, not really paying attention to where I was going. When I looked up, I saw the cult leader standing right in front of me. He was waiting for me, smiling as if he knew exactly when I'd come out. All his followers stood behind him in a straight line, blocking the way to my car. Their white robes and long hair billowed in the wind. I grabbed the doorknob behind me and tried to get back inside, but the door automatically locked. I needed to get my keys from my pocket. I didn't have enough time. All the cultists swarmed around me, holding my arms and shoving me to the ground. The cult leader stood above me. He was an extremely short man, but he looked so intimidating from that angle. He smiled down at me and said, "Do you want to see Doug?" What? As they held me down, Doug stepped forward from the shadows. He lit a match and threw it into one of our metal trash cans. A fire instantly burned out, and he just stood there, so close to the fire that I was scared his hair would burn. He stared at me, a sad look on his face.
"There he is," the leader said. "And thanks to you, he broke our most important rule. He allowed his human name to be spoken. Now, there are consequences."
I looked around to see if anyone could see us from the street, but nope. We were blocked off in here, and no one was going to come. "What do you want?" I shouted.
"I only want your help,"
the man said.
"The brother once known as Doug must cleanse himself through fire."
I looked up and saw Doug raise his hand into a fist. He was going to stick his arm in the fire. "No!" I screamed.
"However,"
the man said,
"you can cleanse yourself in his place. And if you do, Doug will be released from the Brotherhood."
What kind of sick mind game was this? I could help my old friend escape by sticking my hand in a burning trash can, or I could do nothing and have to watch him burn himself. Either way, one of us was going to get horribly hurt. But if I did it, then he'd go free.
"What do you say?"
the cult leader asked me.
"Will you save your friend?"
Doug didn't blink. His face was blank, but his eyes were pleading with me. I wanted to help him so badly, but I couldn't do that to myself. "No," I finally said. Doug didn't hesitate. He stuck his entire arm in the fire and screamed out in agony. I had to close my eyes. It was too horrible to watch. But then the screaming got worse. I looked up just in time to see Doug collapse on the ground, dead. The flames had caught on his robes and spread over his whole body. I'm too traumatized to remember what happened next, but I guess they left. I suddenly realized that I was all alone in the parking lot with Doug's still burning body. I grabbed my keys and drove home. I called the buffet next morning to tell them that I quit. I still don't have a job, but whatever it ends up being, nothing will compare to my last night shift at the buffet.
My name is Mark. I'm an actor, but you've probably never seen anything that I've been in. Even though I constantly went out for auditions, I really didn't have a lot of steady work. My wife Gretchen had a good job at a bank, and I worked part-time at a coffee shop to earn as much as I could when I wasn't chasing my dreams. I also helped out around the house a lot, mostly so that Gretchen wouldn't feel so resentful for being the breadwinner. One day, Gretchen suggested that I start taking on some side gigs to supplement our income. I didn't know how to do that, so she suggested that I go online to see if anyone nearby needed help. I was pretty good at construction and renovation stuff, so I went to Craigslist to see if there was anything that would fit me. Right away, I found a post from a guy named Jonathan. His address was really close to ours, and he needed help fixing the door on his dishwasher. I had the tools for it, and it seemed like an easy gig, so I emailed him. We sent a couple of messages back and forth, and I agreed to go over to his place that afternoon. When I got there, Jonathan seemed really nice. He took me inside and showed me his kitchen. His house was so much nicer than ours. I could tell he made a lot of money. Everything was expensive and clean, except for his dishwasher. It was an old model, and its door had fallen completely off. As I checked out the damage, he poured me a glass of lemonade. I asked him what had caused the damage, and he said, "Oh, it's just old, I guess." Then he handed me the lemonade. I could tell he was lying. There were scratches along the edge of the door, and the screws had been yanked out. Whoever had broken this dishwasher had done it on purpose. It looked like someone had whacked a wrench against the side of it until the whole door fell off. I instantly got suspicious. I looked down at the lemonade in my hand and knew that I shouldn't drink it. This guy was up to something, and I didn't trust anything that he gave me to drink. I pretended to take a long sip, but I kept my lips shut. Then I asked if he could get me a towel before I got started. While he grabbed one, I quietly poured the rest of the lemonade down the sink. When he came back with the towel, I pretended that I just finished drinking the whole thing. He smiled and told me to take my time. Then he left the room. Despite my fear, I wasn't 100% sure that Jonathan had tried to poison me. Maybe it was all in my head. So with him out of the room, I turned toward the dishwasher. I would finish the job and get out of there as soon as possible. It took me less than 10 minutes to get the door back on its frame. The dishwasher still had obvious scratches along its side, but otherwise it was fixed. I stood up to leave, but when I turned around, Jonathan was already standing right behind me. "Done already?" I nodded. "Are you okay?" he asked. "You look a little woozy." The way he said it told me everything I needed to know. He expected me to be woozy. He had tried to. If I was going to leave safely, I needed to play along. "A little," I said, forcing myself to stumble a bit. "Maybe you should sit down for a bit while I get your money." He grabbed my shoulders and guided me toward the living room. I saw a long rope laying on the table. I hadn't noticed that before. Clearly, he was planning to tie me up. "Actually," I said, "just Venmo me. I need to get home." He tried to tell me to wait. He said I wasn't in a good state to drive. He still thought that his stuff was coursing through my system. I didn't stop, though. I hurried toward the door and flung it open. I could have raced out of there, but there was someone standing in my way. Gretchen. She was out on the porch, waiting to knock. Without saying anything, she walked inside, forcing me to step back. "What's going on?" I sputtered. She gently placed her hand on my chest, and then she violently shoved me backwards. I fell onto the couch. Then she turned toward Jonathan and asked if I drank everything. "Yup," Jonathan answered. "It's amazing he's still able to stand." They both turned toward me. "No offense, buddy," Jonathan told me, "but Gretchen needs a real man in her life. It'll all be over soon." I was too shocked to say anything. This was all their plan to get rid of me? Gretchen and her lover had created the Craigslist ad, convinced me to come here, and then what? What were they going to do? Gretchen pulled a knife out of her purse. She looked right at me, but her expression was cold. "I'm sorry, but I have to do this." She stepped closer, holding the knife in front of her. Jonathan grabbed my arm, ready to start tying me up. I kicked him as hard as I could. He stumbled backward, colliding with Gretchen. They both fell onto the table. As I ran out the door, I heard Jonathan scream in pain. Gretchen had accidentally stabbed him with the knife. I raced into my car and drove away. When I got to a busy street, I parked my car and called the police. I told them everything, and they said to come into the station to give a statement. They warned me not to go back to Jonathan's house. Within the hour, the police had visited his house and found evidence to corroborate my story. They tested the empty glass and found traces of sleeping medicine. They also found the ropes and the bloody knife. Unfortunately, they didn't find Jonathan or my wife. I'm still waiting for the police to call. It's been 3 weeks and I haven't heard anything. They're still on the run. I grew up in a trailer park in small-town Louisiana. I had a pretty okay childhood, but then I moved to Chicago for college. For the first time, I was away from my tiny town, and I realized how many things I'd been missing. Chicago had so much to offer. The nightlife, the restaurants, the opportunities to meet people. For the first time, I was actually happy. At 19, I finally got my first boyfriend, Dave. I'd always been a plus-sized girl, and down in Louisiana, all the single guys ignored me. But in Chicago, there were plenty of eligible men who could look past my weight and love me for me. Dave and I were together for a couple of years. I really thought he was the one. We were comfortable talking about anything. But whenever he asked about my childhood, I always changed the topic. Honestly, I was a little embarrassed by my white trash past. Dave didn't even know that he was my first real boyfriend. Last year, Dave and I both graduated. We had the summer off before we started our new jobs, so he suggested that we take a trip down to Louisiana so he could see where I grew up. I was really against the idea, but eventually, I just gave in. He booked our tickets, and then I booked the hotel rooms because I did not want us to stay at my parents' house. Dave grew up in Chicago, so he was shocked at how small my hometown was, in a good way. He said it was charming, like he was visiting a foreign country or something. We checked into our hotel, and then I gave him a tour around our main street. The whole time, he kept asking me when I was going to introduce him to my family and friends. We met my parents and brothers for dinner on our second night there, and everyone was surprised that a big girl like me could land a guy as handsome and successful as Dave. They seemed really happy for us, though. The next day, Dave kept asking me to introduce him to my old friends. I'd lost touch with everyone, and more importantly, I didn't want them to tell Dave about what a loser I was back in high school. He stopped pressuring me, but I could tell that he was disappointed. On the third day, we went to the town's only diner for lunch. Thankfully, it was completely empty except for us and the waitress. We ate together, and I got to expose Dave to a real southern diner for the first time. Things were going really well until Ruth Ann walked in. Ruth Ann was my best friend throughout middle school and high school. We used to do everything together. But once I moved away, I realized that our relationship had been pretty toxic. In school, she played really cruel pranks on me almost every day. She'd make fat jokes constantly. She was always thin and beautiful, and I think she used me as her ugly fat friend to make her seem like a good person. Ruth was the last person I wanted to run into. I hid my face, hoping she wouldn't see me. But of course, she noticed me right away and walked over. "Becky!" she screamed. "Is that really you?" I had to acknowledge her and introduce her to Dave, who seemed thrilled to finally meet one of my old friends. Ruth sat next to me in our booth, acting like we were still best friends. I could tell she was really playing it up, because she wanted to impress my boyfriend. She started telling him a bunch of embarrassing stories about my childhood, leaving out all the parts where she was the reason I'd embarrassed myself. I just sat there, holding my tongue. Then she started telling Dave the one story I didn't want him to hear. When we were seniors and she tricked me into skinny dipping with her and then arranged for someone else to steal my clothes. I'd never been more embarrassed in my life. Dave seemed completely wrapped up in the story. He and Ruth laughed together, completely ignoring how uncomfortable I was. The lunch went on and on, though I barely said a word. Dave kept asking Ruth questions, which led to more embarrassing stories about me. They were really hitting it off. The way Dave looked at Ruth was almost flirtatious. I couldn't believe it. She was trying to steal my boyfriend from me, and it was working. We'd already finished eating, so I told Ruth it was great to see her, but that we had to go. Then Dave asked her, "We're gonna hang out at our hotel if you want to join us." "Of course I would," Ruth answered. She wrapped her arm around my shoulder, and I felt like throwing up. "It's been so long since I've gotten to spend time with my best friend." The three of us left the restaurant and walked through Main Street. Ruth and Dave continued talking and flirting while I kept silent. I knew this trip was a bad idea. Before we got back to our hotel, we passed by the creek where I'd been forced to skinny dip all those years ago. I couldn't even look at it without having a panic attack. Then Dave stopped walking. He pulled Ruth aside and whispered something in her ear. She giggled and said, "That's brilliant." I asked what they were talking about, and Dave said, "No one's around, so I think we should try skinny dipping again, like you did when you were kids." I'd finally had enough. "No!" I screamed. "I'm going back to the hotel right now." I started to storm off, but when I looked over my shoulder, I saw that they weren't moving. "We'll meet you back at the hotel then. Dave said, already pulling off his shirt. Ruth smiled mockingly at me. I turned back around and kept walking so that they couldn't see me cry. I went back to the hotel alone, furious. Even though I just had a big lunch, I ordered a bunch of room service to drown my sorrows. I ate and ate, thinking about how Dave had betrayed me. I told myself that once he got back, I'd break up with him. If he was going to treat me like this, then I didn't want him in my life. Hours passed until the hotel door finally opened and Dave walked in. He was fully clothed, but his hair was still dripping wet. "Where's Ruth?" I asked angrily. "Oh," he said casually. "She's not coming back." "What?" "Well, I saw right away what a terrible person she was," he explained. "I lured her into the creek and was hoping that she'd come back and steal her clothes, just like she'd done to you. I thought we were on the same page. I gave you a look." "So you didn't like her?" "Of course not," he said. "Wasn't that obvious?" No, it wasn't at all. It looked like he was full on flirting with her, but I guess that was just part of his plan. "Apparently you didn't get the hint," he said, "so I had to improvise. I hope that's okay." "I don't understand. Where's Ruth?" "Oh, she drowned," he said casually. "What a shame." Then he walked closer and wrapped me in a tight, passionate hug. "Did you?" I started to ask, but I couldn't finish the sentence. I wanted to know if my boyfriend had murdered someone, but I didn't have the courage to ask. He understood what I was trying to say, though. "Maybe," he answered coyly. Then he changed the subject to our plans for the rest of the evening. The next morning, my oldest brother called me with the news. He said that Ruth's body was found floating face down near the pig slaughterhouse. That was when I knew that Dave had told me the truth. Ruth Ann, my former best friend, had made my life miserable, and my boyfriend had drowned her because of it. When I got off the phone, Dave asked me what was wrong. "She's dead," I told him. "I hope I didn't overstep. I just wanted you to be happy." He paused. "Are you? Are you happy?" I should have felt horrified, but the only feeling I had was absolute pure love. "Thank you, Dave."
I've never used Airbnb before. I always thought it wasn't worth the price, instead of opting for youth hostels and cheap motels whenever I wanted to travel. But then I had to go to Albuquerque for a little over the month, and I couldn't find any hostels in the area. I finally checked out the Airbnb website, and I found the perfect place. It was like a commune for creative writers and digital nomads. It had a shared workspace, plus some nice amenities like a pool and a gym. I'd have my own private room, but I'd also get to meet other young travelers. And the best part was, the place was well within my price range. So I booked the room and then flew down to Albuquerque. I decided to just use Uber wherever I went instead of renting a car. Ryan, my Airbnb host, assured me that everything was walkable for my new place. Honestly, I was very excited. I took an Uber from the airport to the address that Ryan had sent me. As I rode there, I realized that the location wasn't as walkable as Ryan had insisted. The driver took me far out of the city into an empty neighborhood in the middle of nowhere. There was absolutely nothing nearby. No stores, no restaurants, just a few private houses and a lot of empty land. My driver dropped me off, asking if I was going to be okay here. I thought that was a weird thing for an Uber driver to say. I told him I was fine, and then punched Ryan's code into the gate. Dragging my luggage behind me, I walked around the premises. The commune looked pretty accurate to the photos I'd seen, but there was a really creepy vibe to the whole place. I didn't see a single other person there. I walked through the main building where they had the shared workspace. It was spacious and decorated beautifully, but it too was completely empty. I followed the directions on my phone to Ryan's private room in the back of the complex. He was supposed to meet me there in person, but instead, he left me a note taped to the door. "It's unlocked. Keys are inside. Enjoy your stay." Disappointed, I pushed open the door and put my luggage on the counter. The room was exactly as he had described, but I still felt uncomfortable. I settled in, took a shower, and then went outside to try to see if anyone was around. The place was very quiet. I hadn't brought any food with me, so I had to go find the nearest grocery store. The map on my phone said that the nearest store was miles away. I tried to order a ride on Uber, but none were available. We were too far out. Without knowing what else to do, I messaged Ryan again, asking where I could go for food. He didn't respond. Thankfully, I had a single bag of M&Ms in my backpack, so I ate those. Still hungry, I got into bed and took a nap. I woke back up around sunset. I could hear noises outside. Excited, I realized that more people had checked in. Maybe they could give me a ride back to the city where I could find a real hotel. I grabbed my room key and headed out. When I walked into the common room, I saw a huge group of people inside. They were all standing in the center of the room, whispering to each other. They seemed to be about my age. They were dressed all in black, and I didn't see any luggage with them. Honestly, they looked like a cult. I ignored my nervousness and stepped closer. All at once, they turned to look at me. None of them smiled. Hi, I said. The whole group stared at me, not moving. Then they formed a huge huddle and started whispering again, obviously about me. The tallest man in the group left the others and started walking toward me. Either he was their leader, or they'd just appointed him to deal with me. He smiled and extended his hand. When we shook, his skin felt deathly cold. "I'm Aquarius," he said. "Jill," I told him, even though I hated to give this creep any personal information. He walked around me, examining me. He stopped right behind me and placed his hand on my shoulders. I was too afraid to move. "Tell me your birthday." "August 6th. The words just came out. He instantly let go of my shoulders, but he still stayed behind me. I was facing the rest of the group. When I said my birth date, all of them gasped, like I just admitted to a crime. Aquarius grabbed the tops of my arms, holding me in place. His fingers dug into my skin. "I'm sorry, but you're a fire sign. We have no use for you." All at once, the rest of them started walking toward me. I had no idea what they were going to do to me, but I wasn't going to wait and find out. I slammed my heel into Aquarius' shin. He loosened his grip on me, and I twisted free. I could feel hands grab at the back of my shirt, but I was too fast. I ran out of the building and into the main courtyard. I raced to the front with no plan except to get as far away from these psychos as possible. I was almost at the gate when I saw something hidden in the bushes. I slowed down a little bit to see what it was. There, half buried in the ground, was Ryan, the Airbnb host. I recognized him from his photo, but in the photo, his head wasn't cratered in by some blunt object. I almost threw up, but I had to keep going. I made it to the gate just as the strange people reached me. They grabbed my arms, but I was able to squeeze through the half-open gate. Then I pulled it shut and jammed a stick between the bars so they couldn't open it. There was just empty space in front of me, with one lonely highway running from left to right. I didn't remember which direction my Uber had come from, so I randomly picked the left and kept running. For a while, the people in black followed me, but once I got far enough away, they all turned back. Maybe they were going to go for their cars. I kept running until I got to a private house. I'm not sure how far away it was. No one was home, so I hid in their well house and called 911. After what I told the police, they sent a bunch of cops to the Airbnb. I met one of the police cars on the road. An officer guided me to her car and took me back to the station. I didn't find out until later that night what had happened. The strange group had booked all the rooms on the property for some sort of gathering. I don't know what brand of witchcraft or Satanism they were practicing, but they killed all the people on the premises right before I got there, including Ryan. They thought they were alone to do their ritual, but no one told them that Ryan's room was rented out to me. That's why they tried to get rid of me, too. When the police arrived, every one of them was gone. They left some of their clothes and ritualistic objects behind, but they drove off before anyone could find them. I ended up checking into a hotel on the exact opposite side of town. I stayed in Albuquerque for the month, like I'd planned. But I kept having nightmares. I still do. Thanks a lot. Have a nice night, I said, shoving the $8 tip into my pocket as I stepped off the porch, the door already closing. It was always nice to end the shift with a decent tipper, though it didn't happen often. It was just after 9 o'clock, and it had been a busy run for a Thursday night, so I was extra tired. Hoisting the empty pizza delivery bag onto my shoulder, I stepped through the gate, shutting it properly behind me, and ambled down the street. I'd had to park a fair distance away since there'd been no space outside the customer's address, so I shoved my hands into my pocket and whistled to myself as I walked. It was a clear, cool night, a faint breeze blowing across the street, though it did nothing to dampen the smell of grease and garlic that constantly clung to me after a long shift. Across the road from me, a young woman was walking her dog, the large Bernese Mountain Dog stopping every so often to sniff something on the side of the road, tail wagging back and forth. I was a big dog lover myself, but the apartment I rented had a strict no-pet policy. I was debating finding somewhere else so that I might finally get myself a puppy. I dragged my gaze away from the dog and kept walking, my beat-up Honda coming into sight ahead of me. There was only one lamp working on the entire street, leaving most of the road doused in shadow, so it wasn't until I was only a few meters away that I saw it. There was something stuck to my car, fluttering in the breeze beneath the windshield wiper. My stomach dropped as a thought crossed my mind. Was it a parking ticket? I thought this was a no-permit area, and I'd only been gone for no more than 5 minutes. How had I got a ticket already? But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't a ticket at all. It was some kind of poster with the words "missing" printed in big letters. A missing poster? Who had put it there? I lifted my gaze and glanced around the street, but I couldn't see anyone. I hadn't passed anybody at all except for the dog walker, and she didn't look like she'd been carrying any posters with her. With a sigh, I reached for the poster and snatched it out from beneath the wipes, tearing the corner. When I saw the photo in the middle, I froze, the blood draining rapidly from my face. It was a picture of me. And underneath the text read, "Missing person. Name, Alexander Raymond. Age, 34 years old." My eyes went wide as I scanned the rest of it. That was me. That was my name. My details. What the hell was going on? A chill touched the back of my neck, spreading over my whole body as I stared at my own face on the missing poster. It was a recent picture, taken up close, but I'd never seen it before. Something else flapped in the breeze, and I moved around the side of the car. More posters were stuck to the windows, all the same. Why would someone do this? Was this someone's idea of a prank? But how could they have known this is where I would be? How had they managed to stick all these posters up in the span of 5 minutes while I'd been out delivering a pizza? Nothing made sense. Swallowing back the feeling of dread in my throat, I began tearing all the posters from the windows until there were none left. If someone was playing a joke on me, it wasn't funny. I'd have to grill my friends later and see which one of them was responsible. Right now, I just wanted to get home. Climbing into the car, I put on my seatbelt and was about to drive away when I saw it. One last missing poster. This time, it was inside the car, sitting on the passenger seat beside me. My dread turned into cold fear then. How had it gotten inside the car? I'd locked it when I'd left to deliver the pizza, and none of my windows were cracked. There was no evidence of a break-in either. It was impossible that someone could have placed the poster inside the car. Yet there was no denying what I was seeing either. I scrunched the paper up with my fist, tossing it with the rest onto the back seat. Then I hit the accelerator and drove off. When I got home, the nightmare hadn't ended. The front of my apartment door had been plastered with the same missing posters. I had to tear a few of them off just to get the door open. Who was doing this? And why? I tried to think of anyone I might have angered or annoyed to the point of wanting revenge, but nobody came to mind. I couldn't think of anyone who might do something like this at all. Even my friends didn't seem capable of going this extreme. I went into my apartment and locked the door behind me, making sure to deadbolt it too. I didn't want anyone sneaking in and putting more of those damn posters inside the apartment while I was asleep. Kicking off my shoes, I went into the kitchen to get a cold glass of water to clear my head. My head was spinning with questions and possibilities. What if this was some kind of warning? What if this was someone alerting me to the fact that they were coming to kidnap me? That at some point in the future I would be a missing person? What if I really was going to go missing and I just didn't know it yet? I downed the water and set the glass on the side, almost hard enough to crack it, my hand shaking with fear. What if? I shook my head, silencing the thought. Maybe I was overthinking this. Maybe it really was just a prank, and not some kind of messed up prediction of the future. I took a few deep breaths to calm myself, and then went around the apartment, making sure every window was shut and bolted. Even if it was just a hoax, it didn't hurt to be careful. If the person behind the posters was planning something, then it would likely happen tonight. And I was going to make sure I was prepared, just in case the worst scenario came true, just in case someone really was after me. After securing all the entrances and exits of my apartment, I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and set up in my bedroom. I already knew I wasn't getting any sleep tonight. I stayed up the whole night, waiting, watching, listening out, but nothing happened. Nobody came to my apartment. When morning broke, I checked outside and found all the posters I'd left on the door had gone, completely disappeared without a trace. I might have thought I'd imagined the whole thing, if not for the posters that were still in my car, scrunched up on the back seat. In the weeks and months that followed, I never found out who put those posters on my car and apartment door. Nobody came forward, and nothing else happened. I didn't go missing. I like to think that it was just someone's idea of a stupid prank, and nothing more. My name is Evan. Last year I got a new teaching job over in Asheville, North Carolina. I'd never been there before, but the job was perfect, and I couldn't say no. I instantly accepted the offer. I had to find an apartment within my price range, but I was shocked at how expensive Asheville was. Rent was more than double what I was able to afford. I looked all over, but I couldn't find anything reasonable. While I was staying in a pretty gross hotel in Asheville, someone suggested that I look for places on Craigslist. I'd never used Craigslist before, and I always thought that it was a bit sketchy, but I was desperate. So I went to the rental listings, and I found a guy named Andy who wanted to rent out a room in his condo. I didn't like the idea of sharing a bathroom and kitchen with someone I'd never met, but the address was literally down the street from my new job. I emailed him to tell him that I was interested. We exchanged some messages and eventually agreed to a Zoom meeting so we could see if we were compatible. When I saw his face on my computer screen, I was instantly relieved. He seemed like such a nice, honest guy. He answered all my questions, and he gave me a really good first impression. During our meeting, he was sitting at his table with the kitchen counter just behind him. I couldn't see a lot of the house, but what I did see looked nice. I asked if he could move his laptop around and give me a virtual tour of the place, but he said that he wanted to clean up a little first. He'd show me later. This meeting was just to figure out if we were personally compatible. It should have been a red flag for me, but I trusted him. I was about to end the call when I noticed something moving on the floor behind him. It was a little black lump. I leaned closer to my computer to get a better look. Andy noticed my expression because he spun around in his chair. Instantly, he jumped up and ran into the kitchen. By then, I could see more of the black lump. It looked like someone's head covered in a garbage bag. It was some poor guy wrapped in a bag, and he wasn't dead. I couldn't see most of him because the kitchen counter was in the way, but I could still see him writhing on the floor. Andy ran toward him and kicked his head until the body was once again hidden behind the counter. He stood there for a second, looking down. I think he was waiting for the body to stop moving. Then he casually walked back to his computer screen. I was so focused on what I'd just seen that I completely forgot I was still on Zoom. He could still see me. He looked right into my eyes, his face weirdly blank. So you saw that, huh? He sounded like I just caught him jaywalking or something. I didn't move. Yeah, I figured. Then he ended the Zoom call. I don't know how long I sat there completely frozen. What had just happened? One second I was having a friendly chat with this nice, normal guy, and the next I was watching a murder. It didn't feel real. Slowly realization set in. I was in danger. I was a witness, and Andy would come for me. I couldn't imagine what he was capable of. I had to figure out if he could track me down. Thankfully, Craigslist uses temporary email accounts to protect its clients, so Andy didn't have my email. We'd never exchanged phone numbers or shared our last name, so he didn't have those either. All he had was my Zoom address. Was that enough to find me? Maybe, but it would take him a while. Even if he had all my contact information, he didn't know my motel room. I'd be safe for now. All I had to do was call the police and tell them everything. I reached for my phone and dialed 911. I told the dispatcher everything. It took a while because I wanted to include every detail while it was fresh in my brain. I knew that they'd record those calls for later. Then I told her I was driving straight to the station and hung up. I went to the bathroom and splashed water on my face. I think I was still in shock, at least a little bit. That seemed to help. Then I grabbed my keys and left. When I opened the hotel door, Andy was waiting on the other side. In the time it took me to talk to the police, he had driven across the street and found me. I felt so stupid for not going to the police station immediately. He shoved me backwards and walked inside. Before I could stop him, he slammed the door shut behind him. It's not personal. I just can't have witnesses. He popped open the pocket knife in his hand. Now, I knew I should have been terrified, but thank God I was still in shock. I stood there facing him. If you're a murderer, why would you even want a new roommate? His eyes widened in anger. I'm not a murderer, he screamed in my face. I just killed one person, my jackass uncle, that's it. I was going to bury him and be done with it, and then you stuck your nose in my business. He jabbed the knife into my stomach. I felt the force, but I didn't feel the pain. Not yet. Andy looked at me, confused at my non-reaction. I guess I didn't even flinch. In his moment of confusion, I grabbed him by the side of the head and bashed his face against the wall. I'd never fought anyone in my life. I'd never even seen a boxing match. I didn't like violence at all. But in that moment, I was acting like some action star. I let go of his head and he slumped onto the ground, his face leaving a long streak of blood on the wallpaper. I wasn't sure if he was dead, but he probably was. Then I slowly sat back on the hotel bed. Andy's knife was still sticking out of my stomach. I was finally starting to feel the pain. It was excruciating. I grabbed my phone and called 911 again. Hey, I think I need an ambulance.
There was something fascinating about this salt shaker from when I had first seen it on eBay. I should have known I wasn't the only one who desired possession of such a beautiful piece. It had a tortured look, strange if I must say, as though whoever had created it had made it a piece of art, instead of something that should simply be used for its purpose. I thought about this compelling salt shaker for a few seconds, and I must confess, I tried to restrain myself from making a bid for it. I had bought a few stuff from eBay since I'd been in college. It was relatively cheap and at the tip of the finger, but this salt shaker was not something I thought I had needed. Even as I found myself on that sunny Monday morning when I should be working on an assignment that was due later that evening, tapping away on the bid icon for $5 whole. It was big money for a college student, as I was, but I made the bid anyway. I did not feel excited or regret my purchase initially, and I'd gone about my days as I would after my auction had been selected by the vendor on eBay. Just as I was informed, I received my purchase via dispatch 3 days later, and it was there that my problems must have started from. I had no idea how long I had been watched as I went about on campus, but in days, I had observed a strange man following me. He was never too far behind, as I noticed. His chin was neatly shaven, as was his head, and he had hair only on his mustache and on his brows. I never spoke to anyone about it because I had assumed it was just a figment of my imagination that this man simply appeared out of the ordinary and seemed to be everywhere I was, following me about. Campus was big, and there were routes that I could alternate around, so I did. And in the first 3 days, I did not see the stranger around me or stalking me, but by the 4th day, like a persistent shadow, he was somewhere by the wall watching me. I have had enough, and I plan to lure him into a more comfortable space where I can question him and perhaps understand why he was following me. I made the route to my house obvious from campus. I made sure he was on my trail the entire time, even though I had tried to conceal my routes to him all the previous times I had noticed him. By the time I had made my way home, he was not far behind me, just as I expected, so I played to pretend a little more and slammed the door to see if he would knock with his inquiry. The idea of this small man who had started to stalk me out of the blue and being a nuisance was what plagued my mind, but somewhere in the deepest recesses of my mind, I had a sense of some danger, so I made sure to keep a kitchen knife close by the door. My heart started to beat quicker when I was alone in the house, waiting for this strange stalker to approach the door. I looked at the door with anticipation, and suddenly, almost with some excitement, I saw the handle of the door move. I suspect it did not move. It was yanked as though forcibly attempted. That was strange, I thought to myself. When he tried again, forcibly trying to gain entry instead of knocking, I knew something sinister was afoot. As terrified as I was of the consequences of a matter which I had no control over, I tried not to betray my terror when I approached the door. "Who's there?" I asked once I was by the door, with my hand on the hinge to stop him from trying again. "You have no idea who I am," he hissed, like a snake, and his voice traveled directly into my hearing as though the door were not between us. "I need the salt shaker, Alex." He knew my name? The blood in my veins ran cold. My heart stopped and my entire body was numb to sensation. The saliva on my tongue slinked down the back of my throat, and it felt like harsh rock scraping straight for my belly. "Who are you, and why are you after me?" I asked. Immediately alert to my surroundings, I stared straight at where I kept the knife. Then I stopped. The salt shaker? He knew about the salt shaker I got from eBay, and he wanted it. I pressed my ears against the door, and all I heard was the sound of my own heart beating. The revelation made me dizzy. I knew I was in trouble, and it was trouble that I was not sure I could negotiate myself out of. "Open the damn door, Alex," he said, and what followed was the sharpest whack I had ever heard, the sound of a bullet flying through the door. It missed me by inches, and I stared at the hole in the door with disbelief. I hopped on my feet, and they did not fail me. I threw myself on the floor and crawled across carefully as he let off his gun again, 3 times in different parts of the door. I scurried to the corner of my room where I had kept the knife and grabbed it like my life depended on it, because my life did. I saw my life flash before my eyes when he smashed through the door with that determined stride. He announced that my life was worthless to him, but he needed the salt shaker because, like many of those who have bought the salt shaker, had taken part in the dirty game he set up, choosing themselves to be killed as it seemed. I could scarcely breathe, and I was sure my heart was beating so fast he could hear it if exhaled. I held back on my breath, and lack of oxygen made me frantic. He announced that he would find me, and he would kill me and everyone else who held the salt shaker. In that moment, I had deep regrets. A mindless psychopath coming after me because of a salt shaker I had purchased. I knew there was worse out there. "Come out, Alex. You only delay your moment of death," he said, and took a sweeping look around the room. With his back turned to me, I was overcome by sudden desperation. My life was in my hands, and I was never more aware of the terror of losing it if I did not act on the impulse and rush of adrenaline. His own life was in my hand, and the thought of killing a man made me wrench. The noisy gasp drew his attention to me, and staring in his eyes, I saw red. I launched myself and my knife straight at his back. The knife twisted and his body went limp in my hands. I pulled back and he fell to his knees first and then on his face. My body was cold for a moment, but I managed to call the cops, who came around in an hour to remove his dead body from the floor of my apartment.